It's the announcement that has sent shockwaves through every corner of the globe. Just minutes ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed what many feared. King Charles has made the heartbreaking decision to remove Archie and Lilibet's royal titles. In one short statement, two innocent children were effectively erased from the royal lineage. And yet, behind the polished official wording and the calm royal tone, something darker is brewing. Because this wasn't a spontaneous act. This was months, if not years, in the making. What really pushed the king to take such a drastic step? Was it protocol, politics, or punishment? And what does this mean for Harry and Meghan's already crumbling relationship with the monarchy and with Britain itself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. As the news spreads, social media explodes. Some call it justice. Others call it cruelty. But inside the palace, silence reigns, a heavy, suffocating silence that speaks louder than words. One thing is certain, this is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a royal reckoning that could change everything we thought we knew about the House of Windsor. Let's rewind. Not days, not weeks, but years, to the moment this storm began to gather. Because to understand this announcement, we have to go back to the seeds of resentment, the quiet whispers behind palace walls, and the decisions that split a family in two. Remember that moment, 2020, when Harry and Meghan stood before the world and declared they were stepping back from royal duties. It was sold as freedom, a move toward independence. But behind the scenes, it was seen as betrayal. A son turning his back on centuries of royal expectation. And it didn't stop there. The interviews, the documentaries, the memoir, each one adding another crack in the fragile bridge between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. While the public argued, the palace calculated. For them, every word, every gesture was a potential threat to the crown. And while Harry and Meghan insisted they were speaking their truth, insiders say the king was quietly losing patience. But what triggered this specific decision, now, after all this time? Some royal watchers claim it's the culmination of a series of private disputes, secret correspondence, and behind-the-scenes power plays that finally reached their breaking point. Others believe it was spurred by something much simpler, an act of self-preservation. The monarchy must protect itself, a royal aide allegedly said earlier this week. But protect itself from what? From scandal? From rebellion? From its own blood? Let's talk about what really happened and why this moment is more tragic than anyone realizes. You see, the titles of Archie and Lilibet weren't just ceremonial honors. They symbolized legitimacy, belonging. When Queen Elizabeth passed, the children of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex became, by law, eligible for princely titles under the 1917 letters patent. It was tradition. It was automatic. Or so everyone thought. But royal tradition has always been flexible when it serves power. And that flexibility just turned against two children who have done absolutely nothing wrong. Think about that. The grandchildren of the king himself, stripped of the right to be called prince and princess. Innocent bystanders in a decades-long struggle for control, reputation, and image. It's heartbreaking, it's political, and it's deeply personal. Inside sources describe King Charles's tone during the final approval as somber, not angry. He didn't speak much, one insider claims, but when he did, his words were final. This is what must be done. For the monarch, this wasn't just a family dispute, it was a matter of legacy. Every sovereign, from George V to Elizabeth II, faced their own crises. For Charles, the crisis is Harry and Meghan. The challenge isn't war or empire, it's media, perception, and control. But let's ask the real question. Why now? Why this timing? Some speculate that it coincides with growing pressure from senior courtiers and other royals, particularly Prince William and Princess, and, to finally draw a line. There's also talk of an upcoming constitutional review related to the royal titles and the streamlining of the monarchy. But others whisper something far more personal, that a final conversation between father and son ended so bitterly, so irreparably, that this decision became inevitable. What did they say to each other? Was there an apology or an ultimatum? No one knows for sure. But one thing's clear. This announcement wasn't just bureaucratic. It was emotional. The subtext is obvious. You've gone too far. And now, even your children will bear the consequence. That's what makes this so devastating. It's not just about royalty. It's about a father disowning a part of his family, even if not by blood, then by name. Imagine that level of heartbreak. The children may be too young to understand today, but one day they'll look back and ask, why? And what will the answer be? The palace has chosen its words carefully. The statement released this morning was brief, almost cold in its precision. No sentiment, no elaboration. Just a formal declaration of change. But every royal watcher knows that what isn't said often matters more than what is. Following discussions within the family, it has been agreed that the titles of Prince and Princess will not apply to the children of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Agreed. That word stands out. Who agreed? Was Harry even consulted? Was Meghan informed? Or was this yet another decision handed down without warning? A reminder that, despite everything, the monarchy always has the final say? If that sounds harsh, remember, this family has always operated behind layers of formality and duty. But today's announcement cuts through those layers and exposes something raw. A wound that's never healed since the Sussexes left the royal fold. Now, let's not ignore the irony. Just a few months ago, Meghan spoke about forgiveness and healing in an interview. She hinted at reconciliation. Harry, too, expressed hope that his father might still find peace with him. But instead of peace, the king delivered a verdict. No titles, no recognition, no royal standing. Was this decision made to protect the monarchy's image? Or was it meant to send a message, not just to Harry and Meghan, but to anyone who dares to step outside the institution's control? For some, this is justice, the monarchy reasserting itself after years of humiliation. For others, it's cruelty, punishing children for the sins of their parents. And let's not forget the public reaction. Within minutes of the announcement, hashtags like #NotMyKing and #RoyalRevenge started trending. News outlets scrambled for statements. Pundits filled airwaves with speculation, and royal commentators couldn't stop replaying the same question. What pushed the king over the edge? Meanwhile, silence from the Sussex camp. No official statement. No response from Montecito. But that silence speaks volumes. Because when Meghan goes quiet, it usually means one thing: strategy. Inside sources from California claim that Meghan was blindsided, though others suggest she knew something was coming. A recent pattern of cryptic posts, subtle quotes about truth and betrayal, might have been early signals that she anticipated this moment. And what about Harry? Insiders say he's devastated, describing him as furious but helpless. He's been through loss before: his mother, his military identity, his royal status. But this hits differently. This time, it's his children, his legacy. Think about that for a second. For a man who's spent his entire life fighting against the shadows of the institution, to watch that same institution erase his children from its history, that's more than betrayal. That's annihilation of identity. But it's also a warning shot to anyone who thought the monarchy had softened. King Charles has drawn a line. The message is unmistakable. Family may be family, but the crown comes first. Always. And yet, there's something deeply tragic in that. Because behind every royal headline is a human story. A father and a son, trapped in centuries of tradition and expectation, unable to meet as equals. A daughter-in-law demonized for defiance. And two innocent children whose futures were decided in a room they weren't even allowed to enter. Still, some royal aides insist this was the only option. This was about protecting the integrity of the monarchy, one insider reportedly said. Titles carry weight, and if they're used outside the crown's control, they lose meaning. In other words, the monarchy couldn't risk the Sussex brand continuing to trade on royal prestige while rejecting royal responsibility. But to the public, the optics are brutal. How does it look when the king, a grandfather, strips his grandchildren of their titles while preaching compassion and modernity? How does it align with his image as a unifying monarch? That's where the contradictions begin. Because for all the palace's talk of modernization, this decision feels archaic, like something pulled from another era where image mattered more than empathy. And that's what makes it so fascinating and tragic. The real power of this story isn't just in the announcement. It's in what it reveals about the monarchy itself, the cracks, the coldness, the calculation. Every decision comes with a cost, and this one might be higher than the king ever imagined. So as the world reacts and the family retreats into silence, one question lingers in the air. What happens now? Because if this was meant to end the chaos, it might just unleash something far worse. And somewhere, behind closed doors, a new royal document is said to exist, one that could explain everything. A letter, written by the king himself, detailing the real reason behind this decision. A letter Meghan allegedly saw before the world did. But what did it say? And who leaked it? Because if the rumors are true, the letter might not only expose the real motive behind the title removal, it might reveal the next royal scandal waiting to explode. And no one, not even the king, will be ready for what comes next. It began in silence. No fanfare, no press notice, no public schedule update. Just an unmarked car slipping quietly through the gates of Sandringham Estate under a gray English sky. The wind was sharp, the air heavy, and the mood, according to one palace insider, was funereal. No one smiled. No one dared. Because inside the walls of the king's private residence, something monumental was about to happen. A secret meeting, called at the last minute, attended by the most powerful royals in Britain, would change the monarchy forever. The world had no idea. Not yet. But in that room, decisions were being made that would strip two royal children of their titles and ignite a global firestorm. So why Sandringham? Why not Buckingham Palace or Clarence House? The answer, insiders say, lies in history. Sandringham is where the late Queen made some of her most private, consequential decisions. It's also where, years ago, the Sandringham Summit decided Harry and Meghan's fate as working royals. So perhaps it's poetic, or cruel, that the same place has now witnessed another blow to the Sussex family. Reports suggest the attendees were carefully chosen. King Charles, of course, sat at the head of the long oak table, papers spread before him. To his right, Prince William, calm but visibly tense. Across from him, Princess Anne, stoic as ever, her expression unreadable. And at the far end, a familiar face, Sir Clive Alderton, the king's trusted private secretary, holding a small folder embossed with the royal crest. Noticeably absent, Harry and Meghan. That, sources say, was deliberate. They were never invited, one insider confided. This wasn't a discussion, it was a declaration. The conversation began with the king's voice low and steady. He spoke of duty, of reputation, of the need to preserve the dignity of the institution. It wasn't emotional. It was clinical, almost rehearsed. Those present described it as the sound of a man who had already made his decision but wanted the illusion of consensus. Prince William reportedly nodded, but his silence was heavy. He knew what this meant, not just politically, but personally. His nieces and nephews, the innocent faces of a fractured family, about to lose the very thing that tied them to the crown. And then came Princess Anne. Her tone was firm, her words sharp. If you hesitate now, she is rumored to have said, we risk letting sentiment erode duty. This must be final. The king didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at the folder before him. Inside were documents drafted weeks earlier, official legal papers confirming the decision to revoke Archie and Lilibet's titles. Witnessed, reviewed, ready for his signature. The kind of paperwork that doesn't appear overnight. Which means this meeting wasn't about deciding. It was about executing. That's when the tension rose. Sir Clive reportedly outlined the communications plan, a quiet release to the press, no direct quotes from the family, and an emphasis on simplification of the monarchy. A phrase polished enough to hide the sting of rejection. But there was one detail that no one expected. The king wanted it done immediately. Within 48 hours, the world would know. Are you certain, sir? Alderton allegedly asked. The king looked up slowly. Yes, he said. It's time. At that moment, a staff member discreetly entered the room with tea, unaware they were walking into history. No one spoke as the king reached for his pen. The scratching of the nib on paper was the only sound. One signature. 2 words. Final. But if you thought that was the end of the meeting, think again. Because what came next shifted the energy entirely. Prince William broke the silence first. Father, he began carefully, this won't end it. You know that. The king didn't reply, only exhaled. William leaned forward. Harry will see this as war. And interrupted sharply. Then let him. He's been at war with us for years. That single exchange, brief and unguarded, revealed the entire fracture line of the modern monarchy. Duty versus empathy. Control versus chaos. The crown versus the blood beneath it. For years, the palace had been haunted by the fear of Harry and Meghan's influence. Their ability to command headlines, control narratives, and outshine the working royals through Hollywood connections. But what they couldn't control, they could cut off. Titles, privileges, and the last symbolic tie binding the Sussex children to the institution. Still, beneath the steely formality, those close to the king say there was something else: pain. He wasn't angry, a source revealed. He looked haunted. Haunted by what, though? Guilt? Duty? The shadow of his mother's legacy? Because let's not forget, Queen Elizabeth adored her great-grandchildren, even those she saw less often. She was known to have said that family comes before everything. And now, her son was doing the very thing she had avoided, publicly severing family ties for the sake of royal image. But the decision had been made. The clock was ticking. After the meeting adjourned, the royals dispersed quietly. William left first, heading straight to Windsor. Princess Anne remained behind for a few minutes, reportedly speaking to her brother in private. No one knows exactly what she said, but one aide overheard a single line. "You've done what she never could." She, of course, meant their mother. That night, the estate was unusually still. A single light glowed in the king's study, where he sat alone, staring at the papers he'd just signed. Some say he made a call to his press secretary. Others claim he simply poured himself a glass of whiskey and whispered, "God help them." Meanwhile, across the ocean, Meghan and Harry had no idea what was coming. Or did they? Because here's where things get strange. The very next morning, a courier was dispatched from the palace, destination undisclosed, contents sealed. The envelope bore the royal crest and the private insignia of the king. And according to sources close to the Sussexes, it arrived in Montecito just days later. Inside was a letter, one that would change everything. The letter's tone, they say, was formal, almost cold. No warmth, no fatherly affection. Just lines of constitutional explanation and necessary adjustments. But at the very end, in handwriting unmistakably his, were 6 chilling words. "You remain family, but not royals." Imagine reading that. Imagine holding a letter from your father, the King of England, telling you that your children, your legacy, your name, no longer belong. That they are, in the eyes of history, outsiders. And yet, what's most haunting is that Meghan reportedly never replied. No angry statement. No press release. No tears in public. Just silence. But Harry couldn't stay quiet. In the days following the letter's arrival, palace insiders say the king received a phone call from an unknown number. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. The tone, described by those who overheard fragments, was volatile. Voices were raised. Words like betrayal and final straw were mentioned. The call ended abruptly. The next morning, the palace issued an internal memo instructing staff to prepare a communication strategy for potential backlash. The leak, they feared, was inevitable. And they were right. Because while the king tried to control the narrative from Sandringham, someone else, someone close, was preparing to expose the story from the inside. But who? Was it a sympathetic aide who disagreed with the decision? A staffer loyal to Harry? Or perhaps someone in the inner circle with their own agenda? Whoever it was, they would trigger a media explosion that the monarchy could never fully contain. But before the world found out, before the headlines erupted, there was still one more moment inside that Sandringham meeting that no one outside the palace has ever heard about until now. As the final documents were sealed, the king reportedly paused and looked around the table. His gaze lingered on the empty chairs that should have belonged to Harry and Meghan. "I wish it could have been different," he murmured. For a split second, there was silence. Then Princess Anne, ever the realist, replied quietly, "We all do." And with that, the meeting ended. But as the royal cars drove away from the estate and the heavy gates of Sandringham closed behind them, none of them realized that one of the king's own aides was still inside, holding a copy of the signed decree. A copy that would soon make its way out of the palace, into the wrong hands, and eventually into the press. Because what happened at Sandringham was supposed to stay secret. But secrets in the royal family never stay buried for long. And the moment that document left those gates, it set off a chain reaction that no one, neither the king, nor his courtiers, nor even the Sussexes, could control. The letter was just the beginning. But what came next would expose the true heart of the monarchy and reveal that this tragic announcement was only the first step in a much bigger plan. It arrived in silence. No royal courier in full uniform. No gold seal ceremony. Just an ordinary envelope, tucked discreetly into a diplomatic pouch and handed to a waiting driver. The kind of delivery designed to draw no attention, and yet it carried the weight of generations. Inside was the letter that would sever Archie and Lilibet from their royal lineage forever. A letter that, according to sources close to the Sussexes, left Meghan pale, speechless, and trembling when she read it. Let's be clear, this wasn't just another memo from the palace. This was personal. This was final, and it bore the unmistakable handwriting of King Charles III. The letter, delivered to Montecito under the guise of private correspondence, was reportedly opened by Meghan herself while Harry was out on a morning run. Neighbors later recalled seeing unusual security activity around the Sussex estate that day. Additional vehicles, unfamiliar faces, even a second layer of surveillance at the front gate. Something was clearly wrong. The paper was heavy, royal stationery, thick enough to feel like a message carved in stone. The royal crest embossed at the top shimmered faintly under California sunlight. For a moment, Meghan thought it might be a reconciliation note, perhaps the long-awaited olive branch after years of tension. She'd even told a close friend days earlier, "I think Charles wants to mend things." But as she read the first line, her hands began to shake. After extensive consultation and reflection, it has been determined that the titles of Prince and Princess shall not extend to your children, Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana. Each word felt like a blade. Her pulse quickened. The letter continued with polite legal phrasing, citing constitutional tradition, public duty, and the monarchy's modern direction. But none of it mattered. The message was unmistakable. The royal door was closing permanently. At the bottom, 6 handwritten words, the ones that would haunt Harry forever. You remain family, but not royals. That line, soft, almost compassionate on the surface, was a masterstroke of royal cruelty. It stripped the children of their heritage while pretending to preserve warmth. But Meghan saw through it. Its punishment, she allegedly said through tears to her mother, Doria Ragland, who rushed to comfort her that afternoon. By the time Harry returned home, Meghan was sitting on the edge of their garden bench, the letter folded and refolded in her trembling hands. He didn't need to ask what it was. One look at her face, and he knew. When he read it himself, witnesses say he went completely still. Not anger, not shock, just an eerie, frozen silence. Then, he tore the envelope in half. Not the letter, just the envelope, as if rejecting the delivery, but not the message. Later that evening, according to a Montecito source, Harry made a single phone call to the palace. The line was patched directly to the king's private office. The call lasted 4 minutes and 23 seconds. No one outside that call knows exactly what was said. But one staff member claimed that the king was visibly shaken afterward. He kept pacing, the aide said. He said it had to be done, but he didn't sound convinced. If this was just a formality, why did it feel like a betrayal? Because it wasn't about protocol. It was about power. Let's rewind for a moment. Royal analysts say this letter didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the culmination of months of internal pressure from senior courtiers and even certain family members who feared the Sussexes were commercializing their royal status. Each Netflix deal, each public appearance, each speech invoking royal values chipped away at the institution's control. The line between private citizen and royal representative blurred beyond recognition. One source at Buckingham Palace revealed, the king had to re-establish boundaries. But at what cost? In trying to protect the monarchy, Charles may have doomed its humanity. The optics were brutal. A grandfather removing royal identity from his own grandchildren while claiming to streamline the crown. Publicly, palace aides prepared a sanitized narrative, one about modernization and balance. But privately, insiders described something much more emotional. One senior courtier allegedly overheard Charles muttering, "They've left me no choice." Another claimed to have seen the king wipe his eyes during a private conversation with Queen Camilla. Meanwhile, back in California, the fallout was immediate. Meghan retreated from the spotlight, canceling planned events and declining interviews. Friends describe her as focused but fragile. Doria stayed with her for several days, helping with the children while Harry dealt with what insiders called a storm of anger and disbelief. The Sussex staff were ordered to tighten internal security. No leaks, no calls, no comments, Harry reportedly told his assistant. But it was already too late. Within a week, whispers began to emerge in royal circles that the letter existed. First at Clarence House, then quietly among a few trusted journalists in London. Someone had seen it. Someone who shouldn't have. The palace went into lockdown mode. No one was allowed to discuss it. But you know how it goes. In royal households, secrets travel faster than couriers. And then came the mysterious text message. According to royal insiders, a prominent UK journalist received an anonymous message late one night. Ask about the Montecito letter. It's the beginning of the end. No name, no number, just that line. Days later, British tabloids started hinting at private correspondence concerning the Sussex children. They didn't have the full story yet, but they knew enough to cause panic. Inside the palace, tempers flared. Senior aides accused one another of leaking. Security staff were interrogated, and King Charles, who'd been assured of confidentiality, was furious. But amid all the confusion, one person was eerily calm, Princess Anne. She told the king this would happen, a palace official revealed. She warned him that you can't hide decisions like this forever. The truth always comes out, one way or another. Back in Montecito, Harry was spiraling. He'd grown up believing that family, however flawed, was sacred, that beneath all the titles and formalities, the bonds of blood would always hold. Now, that illusion was gone. Those close to him described the days following the letter as some of his darkest. He was angry, but more than that, he was lost, said a former friend. He kept saying, they're just kids. What did they do wrong? That question haunted him. It still does. Meghan, ever the strategist, reportedly wanted to release a statement, to tell their side, to defend their children. But Harry refused. Not yet, he said. Let them show the world who they really are. That's when something unexpected happened. A week after the letter's arrival, a new one appeared. Another envelope, this time from London's Royal Mail, bearing the official crest of the Palace Communications Office. Inside, a formal notice confirming what the first letter had implied, that the change would be reflected on the royal family's official website within the week. In other words, this wasn't just talk anymore. It was happening. That same day, Harry reportedly smashed his phone against the wall of his office. They're erasing my children, he shouted, according to an aide. First my mother, now them. The emotional wound was unmistakable. And yet, beneath the rage, something else began to stir, determination. Harry's allies claimed that within days, he began compiling a private file of evidence. Correspondence, dates, recorded calls, everything related to the monarchy's decision-making process. He said he needed to know who pushed for it, one insider shared. He didn't believe his father acted alone. That file would later become known as the Sandringham Dossier, a collection of notes, transcripts, and memos that Harry allegedly planned to use if the situation ever escalated. But we'll get to that later. For now, all the world saw was the calm before the storm. The royal website quietly updated its pages, removing the Prince and Princess designations under Archie and Lilibet's names. No announcement, no ceremony, just a silent digital erasure that royal watchers noticed within hours. Twitter erupted. Hashtags like #NotMyKing and #RoyalShame flooded the timeline. The BBC, Sky News, and CNN ran the headline. Royal titles removed. Archie and Lilibet no longer Prince and Princess. And just like that, the decision that had been whispered about in private became public history. But the question remained, who leaked the letter? Because no official release ever mentioned it. No palace statement quoted it. Yet every journalist seemed to know the same phrase. You remain family, but not royals. So how did they find out? One theory points to a royal aide sympathetic to Harry. Another suggests a calculated move from Meghan's side to control the narrative before the palace could spin it. But there's a third, far more intriguing possibility, that the leak came from inside the king's own circle, from someone who believed the monarchy was making a fatal mistake. Whoever it was, their decision set off a domino effect. Public outrage intensified. Calls for Harry to reconcile turned into demands for a royal apology. And yet, the king stood firm, or so it seemed. Behind the scenes, Those close to Charles say he was tormented, torn between the man he wanted to be, a loving father, a modern monarch, and the king he was expected to be. Strong, decisive, unwavering. He never wanted it to come to this, one confidant confessed. But once that letter was signed, there was no turning back. Still, the king had underestimated one thing: Harry's resolve. Because in the quiet aftermath of that letter, something inside him shifted. The obedient son, the desperate pleaser, was gone. What remained was a man ready to fight, not for titles, but for truth. And as he began to gather evidence, one unexpected revelation surfaced. Proof that this decision wasn't as unanimous as it seemed. Someone inside the palace had resisted it. Someone close to the king. And their name? You'll want to remember it. Because when that person's identity finally came to light, the royal war exploded. And this time, there would be no going back. The letter had detonated like a silent bomb. For days, the palace had pretended everything was fine, that the king's decision to remove Archie and Lilibet's titles was just administrative housekeeping. But inside Buckingham Palace, the walls were shaking. Not from public outrage, that was expected, but from something deeper, something far more dangerous, a royal civil war reigniting behind closed doors. Because while the king's signature had sealed the decree, it was his two sons who now stood on opposite sides of an invisible battlefield. It started with a single phone call. Prince William's voice was cold, precise. He's not taking responsibility, he reportedly told a senior aide after speaking with his father. He's blaming the institution, as if the institution isn't us. That phrase, the institution isn't us, became the defining line of this new rift. For William, the monarchy was survival. For Harry, it was trauma. And for King Charles, it was both, a duty and a curse. So when the letter leaked, William wasn't surprised. He wasn't angry at the media, he was angry at Harry. He wants chaos, William allegedly said during a meeting at Kensington Palace. And now he's using the children to create it. But in Montecito, Harry saw things very differently. He's protecting the crown, not the family, he told a close friend. William talks about duty. I talk about love. That's the difference between us. Those two sentences, duty versus love, became the unspoken manifesto of the brothers' divide. Inside the palace, aides began whispering about Operation Reinforce, an internal effort to strengthen the monarchy's image amid the Sussex fallout. Prince William and Princess Kate were central to that plan. Every public appearance was carefully calibrated: family photo ops, charity visits, school engagements, all to remind the public who the real future of the monarchy was. Meanwhile, Harry watched from across the ocean, seething. They're turning my children into symbols of betrayal, he reportedly told a confidant. And William's fine with it. But was he? Because behind the polished royal facade, William was struggling too. Sources close to him described sleepless nights, tension with his father, and a growing frustration that no matter what he did, the family seemed trapped in Harry's orbit. He dominates the narrative, William complained. Every move we make gets twisted into a reaction to him. It's exhausting. And that exhaustion soon turned to resentment. During a private lunch at Clarence House, William allegedly confronted the king directly. The exchange, though private, was later recounted by a senior aide who overheard fragments through the door. You can't keep indulging him, William said sharply. He's weaponized his victimhood. Now even the children are part of his strategy. Charles, weary, tried to calm him. He's still my son, the king said. But William shot back. And I'm your heir. One of us has to protect the crown. That line hit hard. For a brief moment, the king said nothing. Those present said the silence was like a thunderclap. Because in that instant, it became clear. This wasn't just about titles. It was about succession, legacy, and control. The king was trapped between two worlds. A modern monarchy shaped by compassion and a centuries-old institution ruled by power. And his sons embodied both extremes. Publicly, the brothers remained silent. Privately, they were waging war through influence, allies, and strategy. In the UK, William's camp worked overtime to frame the king's decision as a necessary modernization. Friendly reporters pushed the line that titles don't define royal worth. Royal experts echoed that Harry's children deserve privacy, not pageantry. Across the Atlantic, however, the narrative was very different. Meghan's supporters portrayed the decision as punishment, a cruel, calculated strike at a family already ostracized. American talk shows labeled it royal retaliation. The word revenge trended for days. Each side dug deeper. Each leak, each whisper, added fuel to a fire that hadn't burned this hot since the Queen's passing. And then, something unexpected happened. An internal memo from the palace was leaked, this time not from Montecito, but from within the Royal Communications Office itself. It outlined the strategy to reassert confidence in the line of succession. Buried in the fine print was a single chilling line. The Duke of Sussex and his descendants shall not be styled as royal representatives, now or in the future. In plain terms, not only would Archie and Lilibet lose their titles now, but their descendants would be excluded from the royal family forever. When Harry saw that line, he reportedly went ballistic. "They're erasing my bloodline," he shouted during a private call with a friend. "They want us written out of history." To him, this wasn't modernization. It was excommunication. Meghan tried to calm him, but Harry was relentless. "It's him," he said, referring to his brother. "William's behind this. He's pushing father to do it." Was he right? Insiders at Kensington Palace deny it, but several sources claim William played a quiet but decisive role. "He didn't start it," one aide said, "but he made sure it happened." According to those same sources, William believed that every scandal surrounding the Sussexes weakened the monarchy. "We can't rebuild while they keep tearing down," he allegedly told the king. "If you don't act, the institution will crumble." And that pressure, constant, strategic, moral, may have been what finally pushed Charles to sign the letter. But Harry wasn't about to let it go unanswered. He began speaking privately with journalists he trusted, not to leak documents, but to plant questions. Subtle ones, probing ones. Who benefits most from this decision? Who's next in line to inherit the narrative? He was baiting the palace, and it worked. Within days, the story shifted from the children's titles to rumors of a growing power struggle between the king and his heir. Tabloids started asking, is William running the monarchy from behind the scenes? For Charles, this was a nightmare. The monarchy relies on unity, hierarchy, and the illusion of harmony. And now, the world was seeing the cracks. So he summoned both sons for a private call. Not a meeting, that would have been too dangerous, but a video conference monitored by aides. It lasted less than 20 minutes. No progress, just cold formalities and thinly veiled contempt. When the call ended, Charles reportedly muttered under his breath, "The crown is heavier than they'll ever know." But the tension didn't stop there. 2 days later, William's team arranged an event, a charity gala in London, where the prince was photographed surrounded by children. The headlines were glowing. "The future king focuses on youth." Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry was pictured looking grim outside a legal office. The media did what it always does. They split the screen. 2 brothers. 2 worlds. 1 story. "Look at how it's framed," Harry told Meghan, gesturing to the news broadcast. "He's the saint. I'm the problem." Meghan hesitated. "Maybe that's the point." He stared at her. "The point?" She sighed. "They want you to break, Harry. They want you angry enough to prove their version of you right." Harry didn't respond, but something in his eyes hardened. That night, he made a call to one of his oldest friends, someone who'd known him since his army days. "I'm not playing defense anymore," he said. "It's time people saw what they've done." That friend later claimed Harry hinted at documents, internal communications, phone transcripts, perhaps even recordings, that could expose the truth behind the king's and William's decision. At the time, no one took it seriously. But those documents would soon become the most talked-about secret in royal history. Meanwhile, in London, William faced pressure from within his own circle. Close advisors warned that the optics were turning. "The public sees a feud," one told him. "They see brothers tearing each other apart." William's reply was curt. "Then they're seeing reality." And that's when the unthinkable happened. The king stepped back. Not publicly, but internally. Charles reportedly told aides he would not interfere in matters between my sons. That withdrawal, though well-intentioned, created a vacuum, one that William's team quickly filled. They began quietly coordinating with the palace's media office, shaping the tone of official responses, tightening control of royal messaging. Harry noticed. "The monarchy has become his," he said bitterly. "Father's still the king, but William's pulling the strings." That perception true or not, ignited a storm. By the end of the month, headlines worldwide read, "Royal brothers at war again." Late-night hosts joked about the Netflix prince versus the heir apparent. But behind the jokes, the stakes were deadly serious. Because when the monarchy appears divided, history has shown, it weakens. The institution feeds on unity. Without it, cracks turn into fractures, and fractures turn into collapse. And this time, those cracks were public, viral, unstoppable. But the king wasn't finished yet. Even as his sons waged their quiet war, Charles was preparing one more move, one that would send shockwaves through both camps. Because in the chaos of leaks and accusations, one figure had quietly been working behind the scenes, an investigator tasked with finding out who had leaked the letter. And what that investigator discovered would blow open the next phase of the royal crisis, revealing that the leak didn't come from the Sussex camp, but from somewhere far closer to home. And when that truth surfaced, the monarchy's walls would tremble all over again. The palace had its secrets, but Harry had his own. Far from the gilded halls of London, in the quiet of his Montecito estate, the Duke of Sussex was building something no one anticipated, a meticulously organized collection of documents, correspondences, and recordings. A dossier, insiders say, that would later come to be known as Harry's hidden files. Why did he do it? Because after receiving the king's letter, the one that stripped Archie and Lilibet of their titles, Harry realized something critical. The palace wasn't just taking away titles, it was rewriting the narrative. And in the monarchy, narratives are power. If he didn't preserve evidence of decisions, conversations, and internal communications, history would be written without his truth. Sources close to Harry describe him working late into the night, often alone in his study, surrounded by piles of folders and papers. Each item was carefully catalogued. Letters from courtiers, emails from senior aides, phone transcripts between the king and various officials, even recordings of off-the-record conversations, allegedly made with consent from parties who feared the palace's increasing control. This wasn't about revenge, one close friend revealed. It was about legacy, proving that Harry tried to protect his children. Some documents were mundane. Logistical notes about royal visits, security briefings, and correspondence regarding charity events. Others were explosive. Private memos suggesting that senior members of the royal family had actively encouraged the stripping of titles, emails expressing frustration over media narratives, and records hinting at strategic pressure from William's inner circle. The emotional toll on Harry was profound. Friends described moments when he would sit alone, flipping through the folders and muttering, "I can't let them erase us. Not now, not ever." The process was methodical, almost ritualistic. He knew that if this information were ever made public, it could shift the balance of perception, exposing who had pushed for the title's removal and why. But it wasn't just about evidence. It was about planning. Harry began outlining a series of contingencies. If the palace denied access, he had a strategy. If the press misrepresented the story, he had a response. Every scenario was meticulously mapped. His goal was clear: ensure that, one day, the truth about the decision to remove Archie and Lilibet's titles could not be silenced. Harry's hidden files also contained a deeply personal element, a diary of his reactions. Detailed notes about how Meghan and the children were coping, his private reflections on conversations with the king, and his fears about the long-term impact on his family. According to those who have seen excerpts, the diary was filled with raw emotion, anger, sorrow, frustration, but also resilience. It was therapy as much as it was strategy, one insider explained. Harry needed to process the betrayal, and he did it in writing and organizing evidence. While the files grew, Harry began reaching out to trusted allies, friends, former colleagues, and even some sympathetic journalists, to make them aware that sensitive information existed. He didn't intend to release it immediately. Rather, he wanted to create a safety net. Should the palace attempt to silence him or twist the story, he would have irrefutable evidence. Meanwhile, the palace remained unaware of the extent of Harry's preparations. They assumed that the Sussex's reaction to the letter would be limited to public statements, social media posts, or interviews. They did not anticipate the methodical, almost obsessive, documentation that was unfolding in Montecito. But the first ripple of Harry's hidden files was already felt. Friends reported that the mere act of organizing the information gave him a renewed sense of control. He felt empowered, a confidant said. For the first time, he wasn't reacting. He was acting. The hidden files were not only a defense mechanism, they were a form of preemptive offense. Harry wanted to ensure that no one could manipulate the narrative, that if the story became public, the truth would be clear. The decision to strip titles was deliberate, influenced by internal politics, and had a profound emotional impact on the family. As Harry worked, Meghan played a crucial role. While he focused on compiling documents, she managed external communications. She advised on who could be trusted, which journalists might handle the story fairly, and how to protect the children from public scrutiny. According to insiders, the partnership was seamless. Harry handled the evidence. Meghan managed the optics. Together, they became a unit determined to safeguard their family and their legacy. But not everything in the hidden files was purely factual. Some sections contained analysis, interpretation, and speculation, notes on the motivations of senior royals, predictions of their moves, and hypotheses about media strategies. Harry wasn't just collecting data. He was building a blueprint of the palace's inner workings. The emotional strain of this work was immense. Hours were spent reviewing sensitive materials, often late into the night. Stress, anxiety, and anger intertwined. Friends recall nights when Harry would pace through his study, phone pressed to his ear, voice low but firm, speaking to a select few about potential next steps. Each conversation was measured, deliberate, as if he were preparing for a long, calculated campaign. At the same time, Harry began to notice subtle shifts in the palace. Leaks were becoming more frequent. Some aides appeared nervous, as though aware that someone in Montecito might have already documented every decision. Rumors of internal investigations, reviews of communications, and even security audits suggested that the king's team was sensing a growing threat. Yet Harry continued. Day after day, he added to the files. Each entry, each document, was a piece of armor against the narrative that he, Meghan, or their children were somehow at fault. Each folder represented a silent assertion. We will not be erased. According to insiders, Harry also began coordinating with legal advisors. These advisors were tasked not only with protecting him and Meghan from potential lawsuits, but also with reviewing the documents for potential public impact. Could these files be used in interviews, memoirs, court filings? Every angle was considered, every possibility mapped. But as Harry prepared, one thought lingered: the children. Archie and Lilibet, oblivious to the full scale of what was happening, were living normal lives, unaware that their titles had been removed. That was both a relief and a source of anguish. Harry reportedly told a close friend, "I want them to have as normal a childhood as possible, but I also want the world to know the truth." There's no easy way to reconcile those two things. This balance, protecting his children while preparing for a larger battle, became the central challenge of Harry's hidden files. Every action he took had to account for potential consequences. Every leak, every document, every conversation had to be carefully weighed against its impact on his family. And yet, despite the meticulous planning, Harry knew that at some point, the files would intersect with the public narrative. The question was not if the story would explode, but when. In those quiet Montecito nights, surrounded by folders and papers, Harry made a silent vow. The monarchy might try to erase his children's titles, but they would never erase their story. Every decision, every document, every word collected in those hidden files was a shield against historical distortion. The hidden files were more than evidence. They were a declaration. They were a promise that, no matter what happened, the truth about Archie, Lilibet, and the forces behind their removal would eventually come to light. And as the files grew, so did the tension. Across the Atlantic, the palace remained unaware that their most carefully guarded decisions were being quietly cataloged, analyzed, and prepared for release. The next phase of the royal saga was building, one that would expose motives, betrayals, and fractures that no one could have predicted. Because while the world saw calm, protocol, and tradition, Harry's hidden files were silently preparing the first salvo in a confrontation that would shake the monarchy to its core. And when the first leak finally emerged from these files, the shockwave would be felt in every royal residence, every boardroom, and every corner of global media. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For years, Meghan had built a fortress around herself and Harry. Her team of advisors, friends, and confidants was handpicked, fiercely loyal, and strategically aligned to protect both her personal interests and the family's public image. But no fortress is impenetrable. No circle is immune to cracks. The tension started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Small disagreements over media strategy, conflicting advice on how to respond to the king's letter, and minor leaks to journalists that Meghan couldn't trace. At first, she shrugged them off as miscommunication. But soon, patterns emerged that were impossible to ignore. Insiders say one of Meghan's closest aides began sharing confidential details with outside sources. The exact motivation remains unclear. Some claim it was ideological, others personal ambition, and a few suggest it was blackmail. Whatever the reason, the effect was catastrophic. Sensitive information about the Sussexes' plans, reactions, and even Harry's hidden files was at risk. The first breach came during a high-stakes planning session. Meghan had called a private Zoom meeting with her inner circle to coordinate statements and schedule interviews regarding Archie and Lilibet's title removal. Someone in that meeting leaked the existence of the king's letter to a journalist in London. The story, initially vague, created the first wave of speculation. Meghan's reaction was immediate. She confronted her team, demanding full transparency and accountability. Staffers were interrogated, emails and call logs examined. Allegedly, she spent hours reviewing notes, cross-referencing who had access to which documents, and identifying inconsistencies in their stories. But the damage had already begun. By the time Meghan realized the leak, the palace had been tipped off that information about the letter had reached the media. Suddenly, the carefully controlled narrative Meghan had hoped to maintain began to fracture. Friends describe her as both furious and deeply hurt. She felt betrayed, one confidant revealed. She had trusted these people like family, and they had failed her. The situation escalated when another member of her team allegedly provided insights to journalists about the Sussexes' internal discussions, including Meghan's private strategy notes and Harry's research on the hidden files. Even small leaks, they said, had the potential to compromise everything. And it wasn't just professional betrayal. On a personal level, Meghan reportedly felt isolated. Harry was consumed with compiling his documents and building his dossier, leaving Meghan to manage the fallout from both the palace and her team. According to sources, there were nights when she sat in her home office, scrolling through messages and emails, trying to determine who could still be trusted. The emotional toll was immense. Meghan, who had once thrived on control and meticulous planning, found herself navigating a minefield of deception and uncertainty. She reportedly confided to a friend, "I thought I could protect everything, but even my closest allies aren't immune to pressure or temptation." As the cracks in her inner circle widened, Meghan began implementing strict new protocols. Sensitive information was compartmentalized, access was limited, and digital communications were encrypted. Meetings were conducted in person when possible, and phone calls were minimized. She even implemented a rotating schedule of trusted confidants to reduce the risk of exposure. But even with these measures, the sense of betrayal lingered. Meghan reportedly questioned why anyone would undermine her in such a high-stakes situation. Was it fear of retribution from the palace? Was it jealousy of her influence and position? Or was it simply a desire to ingratiate themselves with powerful insiders who could shape the royal narrative? Insiders claimed the psychological impact was significant. Meghan, who had long emphasized transparency and loyalty within her team, now found herself constantly doubting motives. Every suggestion, every piece of advice, was scrutinized. Even her closest friends were under observation, their every action analyzed for potential duplicity. The tension reached a breaking point when Harry confronted Meghan's team directly. During a private meeting, he demanded explanations and assurances that no further information would leak. According to sources, some aides broke down, confessing to their actions and promising renewed loyalty. Others remained silent, defensive, or evasive, deepening the sense of mistrust. One aide allegedly admitted to passing information to a journalist who had previously worked with the palace. They reportedly said they feared the Sussexes' approach would provoke retaliation or public humiliation. Meghan reportedly responded with disbelief. "So you betray us to protect us? That makes no sense." Amidst this chaos, the The children remained blissfully unaware. Archie and Lilibet continued their routines, playing in the garden, attending school, and enjoying the tranquility of Montecito. Meghan and Harry shielded them from the storm, emphasizing normalcy and safety. But even so, the emotional impact on Meghan was profound. She felt the weight of betrayal not only professionally but personally, as a mother, a partner, and a strategist in a war she had never sought. To counteract the leaks, Meghan initiated a comprehensive review of communications protocols, including encrypted email systems, secure messaging apps, and controlled press briefings. She also began documenting her interactions with staff, creating a paper trail that could later serve as proof of loyalty, betrayal, or malfeasance. According to insiders, this documentation was meticulous, mirroring Harry's approach with the hidden files. Yet, despite these precautions, the cracks in her inner circle remained a source of tension. Meghan reportedly confided to a friend that she felt trapped. "I can't trust anyone fully. And yet, I need a team to survive this." At the same time, these internal fractures offered an unexpected advantage. They revealed which individuals were willing to act independently, either out of fear, ambition, or conviction. By identifying these potential weak links, Meghan could anticipate leaks, prepare counternarratives, and strategically guide the flow of information. Friends describe her as growing sharper, more decisive, and even more formidable during this period. The betrayals forced her to evolve, one insider said. She became ruthless in protecting her family and their story. But evolution came at a cost. The emotional strain, the sleepless nights, and the constant vigilance over every action within her inner circle left Meghan exhausted. She relied on Harry for support, but he too was consumed by his own preparations, creating a shared sense of isolation. As the palace began to respond to leaks and public speculation, Meghan's team was simultaneously managing internal discipline, media engagement, and the psychological well-being of the family. Every move was a calculated risk. Every interaction had potential consequences for the narrative surrounding Archie and Lilibet. And amid all this, Meghan reportedly realized a critical truth. The palace's strategy wasn't just about titles or protocol. It was about perception. The more the world believed the Sussexes were divided or vulnerable, the more control the monarchy retained over the narrative. This realization, painful as it was, became the guiding principle for Meghan's next steps. She would tighten her inner circle, monitor every communication, and prepare for eventual public engagement, ensuring that when the story broke fully, the Sussexes' perspective would be heard and defended. But even as Meghan strengthened her defenses, one fact remained undeniable. The cracks in her inner circle had exposed vulnerabilities. Allies could betray, friends could falter, information could leak. And in the high-stakes world of royal politics, a single misstep could undo years of careful planning. And it wasn't just the palace watching. International media, bloggers, and even political figures were tracking every development, waiting for the first sign of fracture, disagreement, or scandal. The pressure on Meghan, and by extension, Harry, was immense. By the end of the month, Meghan had made sweeping changes to her team. Several aides were dismissed, others reassigned, and new, more trusted personnel were brought in. Protocols for handling sensitive information were tightened. And perhaps most importantly, Meghan began documenting everything, every decision, every interaction, every potential betrayal, much like Harry had done with his hidden files. Because one thing was clear, in the volatile world of royal power, trust was fragile, and betrayal was never far away. And as the inner circle restructured itself, Meghan knew one thing with certainty. The next move from the palace would come sooner than anyone expected, and they had to be ready. Because what came next would set the stage for the most dramatic confrontation of the entire royal saga, one that would pit family against family, tradition against ambition, and loyalty against survival. The quiet storm had reached its peak. Behind Buckingham Palace walls, in the gilded halls that had witnessed centuries of royal history, King Charles III was preparing to issue an ultimatum that would change the trajectory of his family forever. Unlike the letter that had arrived in Montecito, this was not a message for the Sussexes alone. It was a declaration of principle, of authority, and, for many, a chilling assertion of power. Sources say the king spent hours in private contemplation before delivering it. Alone in his study, he reviewed legal opinions, historical precedents, and the advice of his closest aides. The weight of centuries pressed down on him. Every precedent, every decision of his predecessors, loomed like a shadow over the moment. But it was not history alone that guided him. It was a combination of duty, fear, and personal conviction. The monarchy must protect itself, an aide reportedly heard him mutter as he studied the documents. Whatever the cost. Charles's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, was among the few present as the king finalized his decision. Alderton is said to have offered counsel, balancing legal necessity with the potential public fallout. But the king, determined and resolute, had already made up his mind.